Welcome to the Weights and Plates podcast. I am Robert Santana. I am your host, along with Trent Jones, my co-host.
Hello, hello.
Today, we're going to pick up on our wonderful library of topics. We're going to talk about assistance exercises or quote-unquote accessories. That's like the popular word the last 10 years. I want to do my accessories. I just...
oh, you mean like close grip bench?
Like curls, bro. Curls.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, like curls, huh?
Like curls, yeah. No, yeah, like
tricep pushdowns, face pulls. Face pulls,
yes.
Got to do face pulls. Yeah. Oh man, accessories. So I told you on the we were like texting about this. We're like, what are we going to talk about today? And you're like, we got to talk about this bro stuff. And I'm like accessories. It's kind of like that. What is that saying? If you're trying to buy like an expensive car or something, they're like, if you have to ask, you can't afford it.
That's true.
If you have to ask about accessories, they're not for you.
Exactly. I like
That's
that.
where I'm at.
That's where I'm at with it too.
So, yeah. So, okay. Well, why don't we start with this? What is an accessory lift? What do we consider an accessory lift versus, the other lifts that we could possibly do in the gym?
Well, let's start with, some basic terminology. You have, your main lifts, your squat, your press, your bench press, and your deadlift and your chin up.
Yep. We would call, in fact, sometimes we refer to those when we're talking about programming. We'll refer to the 4 compound lifts there, so excluding the chin up, as the competition lifts. Because, regardless of whether you were a competitor or not, we just call them the competition lifts because that is what you would do in a powerlifting meet or a strength lifting meet. You would do the squat, bench, and deadlift in a powerlifting meet, or you do the squat, press, and deadlift in a strength lifting meet. So we'll sometimes refer to those as the big 4 as the competition lifts.
That's right. If you're a competitor, they are competition lifts. If you're not a competitor, they are your main lifts. So, we typically center everything around those lifts. That's what builds the most muscle mass. That's what trains the most muscles to get stronger. Those are your the bread and butter of your program, essentially. As you advance and you get some time under the bar, as you train over a long enough timeline, you start to identify weak points. A novice does not have weak points. A novice's entire body is weak.
Yeah, everything is a weak point.
Yeah, exactly. So, I get these guys, my right arm's bigger than my left. And it's like, well, that's always going to be the case, but it's more pronounced now because you don't do shit. So, no, you don't need to do, more for one arm versus the other. Or, your biceps are small compared to your pecs. Well, buddy, your pecs are also small,
Yeah. Yeah, everything is small.
So anyways, if you have to ask, you can't afford it. Just like you can't afford the car. You don't need to be worried about this if you are a novice. But, eventually, you want to do other things. Let's say your lockout on the bench press is a bit slow. You can do some close grip work or some board presses or some slingshot bench presses. So let's talk about what all that falls under. That falls under the umbrella term assistance exercise. So assistance exercise assists the main lift. So you have assistance exercises that are partial ranges of motion of the parent exercise, like a board press or a pin press.
Yeah, pin press.
Pin bench press, pin squat.
Box squat.
Rack pull,
Yep.
Yeah, so you have assistance exercises that mirror the main lift. Then you have ancillary exercises that, work certain muscles of the lift, like a glute ham raise device. Or glute ham raise, the device is the piece of equipment. The glute ham raise is the movement. That works your hamstrings. You have to keep your back in extension. It works your glutes. You're working a hip extension and a knee extension if you add the, if you do the knee curl component and start with your hips in flexion. That's not a deadlift of any kind, so that would be an ancillary exercise. A good morning is another one, with the bars on your back, right. You're flexing the hips, keeping the knees as straight as you can, and extending the hips. So that, that could be an ancillary exercise for the squat or the deadlift, or a lot of things.
Right.
Your back works on every exercise, so having a bar on your back and setting it could be useful for any lift. Then you get into things like bicep curls and knee extensions and all the bodybuilder stuff.
Yeah, single joint isolation type.
Yeah, that's what we'll call
stuff.
that. We'll just call. We want to call that ancillary exercises. I mean, I've had people do hammer curls when they have elbow tendonitis. Chins tend to work well. Lat pull downs tend to work well for that. I've had people, do a prone grip or neutral grip type curl to, get some blood flow to those tendons. So, they can be used for rehabilitative purposes. But most people do curls because they want their arms to look good.
They want the pump.
And they want the pump. They want to feel like they're doing something.
Yeah. So I kind of think of it like another way to think about these. And so like I like those groups. That's a good way to think about them. You can also think about it kind of like I guess kind of like a funnel, right? So we talk about specificity sometimes when we're talking about athletic development. And, we talk about in programming, we have to have a goal, right? And our goal, if you are trying to get stronger, that's pretty simple. Your goal, the adaptation you are seeking is strength, right? It's pretty cut and dry. But also, if your goal is to build more muscle, whether you want to do it to look better or you want to do it so you have more contractile tissue to get stronger, then the adaptation you are seeking is strength, right? And we'll talk about that more later because some people are like, well, wait a minute, what about hypertrophy though? And I was like, no, you actually want to get stronger when you want hypertrophy. We're going to hash that out more. But what I think about sometimes is I think about these various like categories of lifts in terms of specificity, right? So when you're a novice, everything's weak. You just need to do the most basic stuff you can that addresses whole body, right? So you do the compound lifts, right? So those are the most specific to the task of getting stronger, right? Would be a squat, press, bench, deadlift. On the other hand, doing planks or doing the ab wheel, right? That's not very specific to getting strong because you are not handling heavy weights, right? And you can do it for a long period of time. You can do a bunch of reps on the ab wheel. Maybe if you've practiced it before, it's not easy, but you can do a plank for, a minute or two maybe, right? So these are very non-specific. They're very generalized sort of exercises. And then those are the two extremes, right? Then you can kind of work your way back. Well, a chin-up is a whole lot more specific to building strength than dumbbell curls, right? Even if you're doing heavy curls because you're involving more muscle mass than you do in just a straight up dumbbell or barbell curl. And then you can just walk back to all those supplemental and ancillary type exercises you just mentioned. The closer they get to the big lift, the closer that they look to the big lift, the more specific to building strength they're going to be.
Yeah.
So that's another way to organize your thinking around these. Yeah. So the way I look at it is all of these exercises have a value. It's just that some have an enormous value and some have a very, very low value, right? So like you said, I don't program tricep pushdowns almost never, right? But it's not never, right? They do have some value. And for me, I do the exact same thing. If somebody's having elbow issues or tricep issues with their tricep tendon, I will program some rehabilitative tricep pushdowns. I don't really do tricep pushdowns for training, right? So they do carry a value, but it's just very, very small relative to the other things that they could do in the gym.
Well, that's the thing. So the main lifts are the most trainable. You can add weight to them and get them stronger and stronger over a long enough timeline, and you'll pretty much keep getting stronger at squats and deadlifts, for most of your adult life until you start declining. Let's assume you've started as a young man, you become an old man, you're going to be working towards a decline. That's just inevitable. If you're an old man and you start, you're going to make some progress for a while. But my point is those lifts are very trainable for a very, very long time. Something like a bicep curl, especially if you're doing it real strict and not getting into like cheek curls and turning it into a reverse clean, you're not going to go very far on that beyond the first year probably. You can keep curling. They have strict curl competitions and, people go up and, there's ways to do that, but it levels off probably a lot faster, especially if you start getting into dumbbells. So yeah, maybe with a barbell curl, you might be able to progress that. I don't really see the value in doing that, but you can do that. But you start using dumbbells, for one, as the dumbbell gets heavier, the shape of the dumbbell changes, so it becomes less efficient to maneuver it around, get it set up, and it almost becomes a different lift. That's why barbells are superior to dumbbells and kettlebells and other types of free weight devices, because the barbell never changes shape no matter how much weight you add to it. Maybe why the strict bar curl exists as a competitive lift. You could probably progress it more. I would argue that you can. I just don't care to. I'd rather do my chin-ups.
Right, exactly.
So yeah, you can't. These aren't very trainable. So eventually, you're just basically doing them to get a pump. I mean, if you see these guys at the gym, these big dudes, they're pretty much handling. If you go to a gym regularly enough, you see the same guys. If you start paying attention, their weights don't go up on those types of lifts over time.
They do the same thing 3, 4, 5, 6 times a week.
Even if you go watch like a competitive bodybuilder or like a physique guy, right, and see their workouts on Instagram, the weights don't really go up, and then they'll say, "Oh, well, hypertrophy, bro." It's like, well, you're also not getting that much bigger year to year. They kind of topped off after the first couple of years, like most people do.
Yeah, exactly. So and that's the thing, right? So the only way with these very general, non-specific exercises, they're not very progressible because you're using smaller amounts of muscle mass, using a lot of times single joints instead of multiple joints to move the weight. And so what happens? Well, you can add some reps to them. Okay, great. But then all of a sudden, now you're doing, instead of doing 10s or 8s, now you're doing 12s, now you're doing 15s, now you're doing 20s. What are you going to do? 25s, 30s? At some point, you're not even in a strength building rep range anymore, right? Pretty quickly, you get out of the strength building rep range. So you're not really doing, even if you can add reps to progress them, you're not really doing strength work.
No, not really. And you can't do them heavy because then it becomes a compound movement. Like I said, you turn that dumbbell curl into a reverse clean, reverse dumbbell clean.
Yeah, you're forced to turn it into a compound movement.
Yeah, so, why do people like these so much? Because bodybuilders have attributed the results of their steroid use to, doing a million exercises, and they won't say that. They'll just share their program online or, in our day in a magazine. And, people will follow it and say, oh, I got to do 10 arm exercises today and 10 chest exercises tomorrow. And, it's largely bullshit for most people. There's a nugget of truth there, If you're on a bunch of drugs like a bodybuilder, your recovery's probably through the roof and you want to do more. Do you have to do more? That's a whole nother question. I know guys on drugs that do a fraction of what bodybuilders do, and they're still big jack dudes,
Right.
But,
they have elite genetics, they have chemical enhancement. And the other thing is, like, you don't know, unless you understand where that bodybuilder is in their preparation, you don't know where that program that you're seeing them execute, where they are in that program. Right? If they're doing a bunch of stuff, maybe they're deep into a cut because they're doing competition prep. Like, no duh, you can't squat and deadlift super heavy when you're cutting calories and tapering down for a meet.
No,
right? Ask Ronnie Coleman how that went.
If you're doing,
he tried it.
If you're having a large weight loss, and you're training, I have found that trying to hit intensity, and I've talked about this in other podcasts. I've written about this. Trying to hit high intensities and go close to 1 RM typically doesn't end well. So, if you do your 5s and you're on a calorie deficit and you're losing a significant amount of weight, I'm not talking about, 10 to 20 pounds, on a average size male. I'm talking like if you're losing 30 to 50 pounds or more, and you try to do that on 5s, you're not going to be able to produce the force. You're just, the food's not there, to support
exactly.
that. And
so the same things happen with these bodybuilders, if they're in competition mode, right? It's part of the reason, you've talked about this before, right? One of the reasons that they switch to these smaller single joint isolation exercises is because it's what they can do given the resources that they have on board. And it kind of evolved as a way to continue to preserve muscle mass during their cut while they're dropping body fat. Okay, so looking at some big jacked bodybuilder, and just seeing what they're doing, like you can't just take that and be like, oh, that's the way they became big and jacked. Got it totally backwards.
No, that's not how they got big and jacked. They started out fairly jacked. They took drugs, got bigger, and the champions have all done their big lifts and loaded them real heavy.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. So, you've mentioned before, like Arnold was a 500 bencher, 700 squatter.
700 deadlifter, just under
Deadlifter.
just under 6 on the squat. Remember, he's like 6 foot, 6'2".
Yeah.
And,
big old.
440 on the bench, which is pretty good with, his long arms, long limbs.
Right.
So,
the guy is no slouch. And I'll tell you what, so I was actually, as an aside, my wife and I have been watching the last few years of the Arnold Strongman Classic.
Mm-hmm.
We just watched the one that happened, 2 weeks ago?
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a live stream that got reposted to YouTube a few days after the event. And it's funny, when you watch the Arnold and the strongmen go out. So if you don't know, in the world of strongman competitions, the Arnold is typically more focused on heavy static lifts.
Oh yeah.
So you're gonna see a deadlift from the floor of some kind. Now they'll use kind of like crazy bars, and the rules are not the same as powerlifting, so it's a lot more fun to watch, honestly. But in comparison to other competitions like World's Strongest Man, the Arnold tends to be the heaviest competition of the year, and that's where you're going to see the massive log presses and the giant deadlifts and all that stuff. It's really fun. Arnold loves the strongman competitions. Like, you see him, I don't know how much he's really like, the times I've seen him like talk and interact with the bodybuilders, half the time he's like making fun of them.
Yeah.
These days.
Oh,
but
yeah.
you see him when he's watching the strongman, like he's there watching the log presses, and the guy's just like, I mean, he's having a great time. He loves to see big lifts go up. Why is that? He's a classic lifter. He loves the big lifts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those guys used to work hard,
Yeah.
And, they were on drugs, but they didn't have the shit that the guys now have. So, they had to train too.
Right.
And now it's just, I don't know much about that sport. I don't care. I never desired to compete in it. I don't care. But the thing is, that sport has made lifting popular over the last 50 years. It's responsible for why people started lifting weights and going to gyms, and why we have gyms. They got the momentum going. I think CrossFit brought the barbells back into the gyms in the 2000s. But what still persists from the era of bodybuilding is that you must spend all this time in the weight room doing an endless number of exercises for an endless number of reps, chasing a pump and trying to, hyperventilate and, get your ventilation rate up. And
Right.
You don't have to do all. I mean, why are you in the weight room? First of all, you're in there to get stronger. That's why you lift.
Yeah.
That's why we lift weights. Weightlifting is not a good way to get cardio. So stop making it into a cardio workout. Think about 3 sets of 10. That's 30 reps. I mean, you could probably do that in under 30 seconds if you're running. 30 reps on your legs.
Oh, yeah.
30
Right.
strides. I mean, how fast can you get 30 strides? A lot faster than 30 reps with a weight. So why are you going to pick an inferior stimulus to chase an adaptation that has a much more superior stimulus available? If you want endurance, go run or cycle, push prowler, you can do weight. There's weighted stuff you can do, you go into strongman. You get the best of both worlds. I mean, there's
Right.
There's,
Do some farmer's carries or something.
Yeah. There's greater risk of injury there because you're lifting inefficiently.
Yes.
But it's certainly, you'll get the best of all worlds there. You'll get conditioned, you'll get strong, but this going in the weight room and doing all these circuits thinking you're going to quote unquote get toned, get cut, whatever word they use, that's a bunch of bullshit. The most
Diced.
Yeah.
That's one I heard recently.
I haven't
Diced.
heard that one.
Yeah.
But my point is that the reason muscles look full and toned and firm and whatever word you want to use is because they're developed, and they develop through heavy lifting. And you see this across all the strength sports. Look at strongmen. Look at Eddie Hall after he got out of strongman. He cut down to 375, and he was pretty shredded.
Right.
Definitely not stage lean, but if that guy got stage lean, he'd be 360 still. He'd probably beat these guys.
Yeah.
I mean, how many bodybuilders are 360? And completely ripped.
I don't think any of them.
Yeah, I mean,
Hafthor, I was just looking at him.
Yeah, he was like 405 or something, wasn't he? Or 4?
Oh, he was, no. So because we watched the Arnold Strongmans from the last couple of years, so I think the last competition he did, or pretty close to it, was 2020's. It's 2020 or 2021. Anyway, that was like the last competition he did as a strongman, and he kind of retired and started cutting down to do this boxing meet. Mm-hmm. But the dude he's 6'9". The dude was 450. And that was when he would compete in strongman events, he was about 450.
Yeah.
I think when I followed him before that, when he was off season or he was doing lighter competitions, he would hang around like 420 with abs. like abs at 420.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Maybe 405.
Yeah.
Somewhere in that body weight range. And he pushes weight up to 450 for the heavy competitions. But so he cut down to 335 for this boxing meet.
That's my whole point. Like, bodybuilders, they're so much bigger. It's like, if this guy competed in bodybuilding, and he'd probably have to get down to 390 to get that shredded,
right?
And he'd probably win.
Yeah,
that's my point. They act like, oh, it's because of the way these guys train. What was his name? Dr. Squat, Fred Hatfield. He squatted 1,000, and Tom Platz only squatted like 8 or 7 or 800 or whatever the hell, and Platz did 25 reps with 525, and Hatfield only did 11, and then Hatfield did like 900 on the squat, and what's his name did 700 Platz, and I'm like, are we ignoring how much weight is on the bar for both of these guys? How many people that are reading this are going to do 525 for 11? Probably like a fraction of a person, Come on,
one
get the
guy.
Fuck out. Yeah, maybe one guy, come on.
And Hafthor, right before he kind of wound down his strongman career, I'm assuming he's not going back. I don't know, but
probably not.
He deadlifted 501 kilos.
Mm-hmm.
He deadlifted 1,100 pounds. And he left 5 to 10 kilos on the bar, too. He could have had more.
Oh, yeah.
He just set the world record there. So, yeah.
So back to our original point, these isolation exercises, they might be fun. And, if you want to bang out some curls, go bang out some curls. If you enjoy doing this for recreation and you want to, run a circuit and do all these ancillary exercises, that's fine. But, just understand you're probably exercising most of the time. And we're in the business of getting people stronger and putting muscle on people. And the most effective way to do that is to get stronger at your main lifts. As you do this longer, you can throw other shit in there and you'll have a pretty good idea if it's going to interfere or not. If tricep extensions are going to wear out your press because we've done it. You've tried it at this point, You know that. Why can't I lock out my press this week? Because you did 5 sets of 10 on your lying tricep extensions. That's why, So, you have to prioritize, right? Are you trying to train, trying to exercise? If you're trying to build muscle and get stronger and be a more functional human being, your main lifts are where it's at. And the other stuff needs to be peppered in there intelligently so that it doesn't interfere with your ability to get stronger at the main lifts.
Yeah, exactly. And the reason why we say if you have to ask, they're not for you, is because when you start out and if you have not lifted or have done very little of the compound lifts, then you've got a bunch of gains that's low-hanging fruit that you can acquire on those 4 lifts. So that's where we start you as a novice. You are going to lift the big lifts only, those 4. At the beginning of your novice progression, right? And you're just going to focus on driving up your weight on those 4 lifts. But what happens is eventually you get to a point where you are strong enough that you can no longer recover from that.
Mm-hmm.
And so we got to start pulling out some parlor tricks in order to allow you to continue progressing on the big lifts. Well, so for instance, the novice enters the advanced novice phase, which we would say is, you do a heavy squat on Monday, you do a lighter squat on Wednesday, you do a heavy squat again on Friday. And on the heavy days, you're always adding weight. We do the same thing with the deadlift. We start alternating heavy and light deadlifts.
Mm-hmm.
And once we start doing that, that's the perfect time to introduce on those lighter days a little bit of this assistance work, right? So that's where you would really start to bang out more chin-ups. Maybe you do some lying triceps extensions. As you get more advanced as a lifter and you get deep into intermediate style programming, by definition, you are now hitting the lifts, the compound lifts heavy only once every few weeks. And when you're in this phase, you're going to be spending a lot more time lifting in, let's say, 80 to 90%. It's somewhere in that range of your heavy days, right? So you're kind of it's still relatively heavy, but it's not at your top end. And so when you do that, you then have more space, you have more recovery resources available to handle extra workload in the form of accessories, right? You can go do some volume squats at 80% of your heavy squats, and then go do some, do some hypertrophy work after that, like hit the leg extension or whatever. That's what happens, and that's when they become useful, is when you get more advanced and your programming includes some long periods of periodization, right? Where you're waiving intensity and volume. So that you have some holes that you can plug with this lighter work.
The other thing too is, we talked about how we tend to use assistance exercises to address weak points in the lift, lockout on the bench press, getting the bar off the floor on the deadlift, locking out the deadlift with the rack pull.
Right.
But there's one valid argument that I will make for ancillary exercises, such as isolation exercises, from a functional standpoint, is that they can help if you have an issue with kinesthetic awareness. For example, when you go to a starting strength seminar, Rip is going to talk about how somebody in the room cannot contract their low back muscles or spinal erectors of the lumbar spine. And he'll walk around and put his hand on your low back and ask you to contract. And there will always be that one guy that can't do it. And then he'll eventually lay him on the floor, have him lift his quads up with straight legs to engage those muscles. Then do the same thing with the thoracic erectors by putting the hands behind the head and raising the chest. That's, some people call that a Superman, but we're not going to train that. We're not going to add weight to that and progress that, but it teaches you how to contract those muscles. Sometimes doing stuff like that, for several weeks, it just reinforces it. You don't need to make it real heavy. You could try to add to it, of course, because, we always try to add to stuff. There's nothing wrong with that, but I found that I've taken people that were recovering bros that did bodybuilding workouts and, did things super slow, time under tension, this, that, and the other. And one thing they developed from that was kinesthetic awareness, despite the fact that they weren't very strong, right? So yes. I didn't have a real hard time getting them to engage muscles when I was teaching them the compounds. But you don't need to spend several years with that bullshit to get there, And you certainly shouldn't. You shouldn't. You should still strength train as a novice. I'm not arguing that you should bodybuild first. I'm just saying that as you go through this process and you start to identify some of these weak points and simple form cues aren't working, then some of these isolation exercises, these ancillary exercises, and even assistance exercises can help you feel those muscles. For instance, at the seminars we say you don't need a front squat unless you are a Olympic weightlifter. And that's generally true. The front squat is specific to Olympic weightlifting. The squat is not, whether the bar is on your traps or on your posterior deltoids, whether you're high bar, low barring, safety squat, barring, whatever. None of those, no squat with a bar on your back is specific to anything except squatting with a bar on your back. So this bullshit of, the high bar is just more specific to Olympic weightlifting. How so? You catch the bar in your hands, on your shoulders, or overhead with a wide grip. It is not specific. It is general. And this stupid notion that if you low bar squat, it's so non-specific, it's just going to destroy your clean and jerk and your snatch. That's fucking bullshit, first of all. Because a squat is not a competition lift in Olympic weightlifting. That's just an aside.
Yeah.
But a clean and jerk is, and a clean is caught in a front squat position. So that's how the front squat kind of, got developed. It's like, okay, we're going to simulate the squat and overload it so that when you clean, you can just stand right up. It just reinforces the movement. I like front squats for guys who round their upper back coming out of a squat. Mm-hmm. And I don't use it immediately, but if I got a hard case where I'm, it's just happening no matter what I do and it just doesn't seem to go and we're far enough along the adaptation curve where, okay, early intermediate, late novice. All right, we're going to use a front squat on the lighter day and we're going to run it up heavy. Sometimes you have to start it light because the wrists hurt, or they can't get the front rack up high enough. So you're killing a couple birds with one stone here. You're getting their lats more flexible. You're getting their wrists more flexible. Then you run it up, but it has to get heavy. It has to get heavy enough to where they might drop it if they fuck it up. And that's exactly what I want, because the beauty of a heavy front squat is you have to set your back or you're going to drop it, plain and simple. Yeah. So if you're motivated enough to get that weight, you're going to set your back. I mean, eventually it gets hard and your back might round a little bit, but you're going to set your back for the most part. And I've found that to be an effective way to keep the back in extension while performing the other lifts. Not just the squat. I use it for the squat, but I think it's also very specific for the press because you're going to be holding weight far heavier than you can press on a front squat. At the top of a front squat. So,
yeah, absolutely.
And what I find on the press is virtually everybody who starts pressing without prior instruction, wants to relax at the bottom. They want to drop their elbows behind them. They want to bend their wrists back, and they want to just kind of rest down there. And no, you're holding the bar down there. That's a working position. There's a bunch of isometric shit going on. Your forearms are in flexion. Your wrists are neutral. Your shoulders, your anterior deltoid is in flexion because you're in a partial shoulder raise at that point. Your humerus is probably at a 45-degree angle pointing down. So your biceps, to an extent, especially your brachialis, is contracting because your elbows are in flexion with a prone grip. Your brachioradialis in your forearm is contracting. So all these muscles are supposed to be working at the bottom of a press. Your back from neck to ass is an extension while you're holding the bar at the bottom. That's what's supposed to be happening. And I find that teaching that is, challenging in the beginning, but 90% of the press is that start position at the bottom. And I like the front squat because you're holding more weight in a similar position than you would in a press. And it's also a position that requires you to keep your back set or you're going to drop the fucking bar.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So there you go, right? So the thing about it is the basic training program of training the compound lifts reveals these weaknesses along the way. Right, like I bet you, and now again, this is where having a coach can come in handy because a coach can help the hard cases that are hard cases from the beginning. But most people, in my experience, they don't have this problem of rounding their back when they're squatting 95 on day one. They probably don't even have it squatting 185, on day, on week number 3 or 4.
No.
It's probably going to happen at like 225.
Yep.
Or 245, right? So the thing is, like, they've already accumulated a couple months of barbell training before these problems pop up, right? And so we don't go to these assistance lifts from the beginning, right? The problems reveal themselves. We cue and use physical cues, verbal cues, and mental models to try to fix it. And if it can't be fixed, sometimes we have to use more proprioceptive things, right? If touch and verbal cues doesn't work, then we go to these accessory lifts. But it happens after the training. The training directs the use of exercise selection, not the other way around. We don't just draw them up. So the thing about these compound lifts is as you train them and as you get more experience, it also reveals muscular deficiencies. Mm-hmm. So in my experience, you hit a point, in your intermediate training phase, which not very many people get to, but if you string together 2-3 years of good, solid, consistent barbell training, you kind of hit a point where just doing more of the compound lifts is not developing enough musculature to get better at that compound lift, right? Like I see some guys that are just genetically, they're not gifted, they don't have big pecs, and their bench kind of gets stuck. And they get in this problem where you can overload the bench and work their lockout. You can try to have them pause and learn how to, basically hold more weight under tension, the bottom. But they can't do enough volume of benching at a heavy enough weight to make their pecs bigger and get them to, drive up their bench over time. And what they really need at that point, after 2-3 years of benching, what they really need is bigger pecs. Mm-hmm. So then you can start to add extra volume to their chest work in the form of accessory work with the goal of just adding more contractile tissue. And what I think, my theory on this is why this works, why accessory lifts work in this case, is because A, this guy is probably pretty strong, even if bench is a weak point for him. Right? He's not benching 135, right? He's probably benching 225, 250, and he just can't seem to break that barrier to get up to 275, 315, right? Right. That's the kind of the magnitudes we're talking about. So it's not that he can move some decent weight in absolute terms. So when he goes and does, chest flies or something, right, he's not doing them with the little dumbbells. He's doing them with the big dumbbells. Yeah. When he does paused bench work, he's not doing it with 135. He's doing it with 205. Whatever it is that we choose. And the goal here, and my theory is that what you're doing at that point is you're just introducing novel stimulus to this lifter because this person has become very adapted to 5s and 8s and 3s and doubles and the normal rep ranges that we use for an intermediate lifter on the compound lifts. And you're able to get a little bit of a novice effect by simply introducing new novel lifts. And you can generate sometimes by changing angles and adding, volume. You can add some muscular size in those deficient areas.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And you just need that, right? There's some lifts, like the bottom of the press is the same way. Like, if you have big fucking lats, you've got something to stack your triceps on at the bottom of the press. If you don't have big lats,
that's a good point.
Then, yeah, it's like a trampoline, right? So when I press, that's part of the reason I'm good at press is I have a short humerus and like I just have fairly large lats for my size. So my tricep, I can feel it pushing down. It's like a giant spring into my lat when I drive out of the bottom.
I'd never thought about that, but you're right. That's what I feel too.
Yeah. And so if you just don't have the lats in the first place, you're never going to get that trampoline effect when you're driving the bar out of the bottom. No. And you're using a hip drive to get a dynamic start. So sometimes you just need that extra bit of muscle mass, and that's where accessory lifts can be useful.
Yeah, absolutely. And, again, kinesthetic awareness is big. And, most of it can be learned in the beginning when you're a novice, but eventually the weight gets heavy, things start happening. You might be able to work through it and grind through a all-out effort in an LP, or you might have to do some things as an intermediate. And then as you become more advanced, like where I'm at, I only have to do the main lifts at this point. I don't get much out of assistance work and ancillary exercises these days. They're fun. I do my chins, obviously, but I consider the chin an honorary barbell lift. But I'm not going to do a bunch of pause deadlifts and snatch grip deadlifts or anything like that like I used to. I just stick with the main lifts. I'm an advanced lifter at this point. I compete in powerlifting and strength lifting, So that's what happens. You do this over a long enough timeline, your technique gets proficient, your weaknesses get cleaned up, and, you're just sticking with your lifts, and they're going up real slow and steady over time. But just like with the example with the front squat, there's countless examples like that where you have lifters that are just motor morons or motor morons beyond a certain weight threshold and can engage certain things. And you have to address that. And there's different ways to do it. Bottom of the press, I had a guy once do heavy reverse curls, not because I wanted to get his reverse curl up. I wanted him to get used to the bottom of the press. And when he's curling, it's harder for him to bend his wrists back because he's trying to bend them straight from the bottom position. So I had him do pause reverse curls. Reverse curl at the top, raise the elbow, pause for 2 seconds, and lower it back down. And then his press started to clean up. Elbows were up, wrists were straighter. But it's not because I made him reverse curl a bunch of weights. It's because I kept putting him in that position over and over and over again. And this is a concept I learned in Olympic lifting. I couldn't keep my arm straight for the last half an inch of the clean, which, a lot of people wouldn't notice it, but I did, and I hated it. And the girl I was working with was a weightlifting coach, and I told her, you fix my second pull. You don't touch my first pull because I'm going to deadlift it, and I know you disagree with that. And if that's a problem, then we're not going to work together. And then she's like,
sure.
He's like, as long as your money's still green, you can pull it wherever you want. So, she's a good coach, good business person too. So we worked together. She never fucked with the bottom, and, we fixed the top. One of the things she had me do was, I do it before, anytime I do Olympic lifts, I do this now. She called them tall cleans. I think other coaches might call them something else because it's hard to find a video of them, so I'm going to make my own soon. But basically, I would get up to the top of the clean, pause in that position, and then try to drop under the bar. And that taught me to not pull with my arms, and it worked. So I would do that to warm up every single Olympic lift session. If I was going to clean, I'd do tall cleans. If I was going to snatch, I'd do tall snatches, And, I'm not trying to get the weight up on that movement. I'm just practicing the motor pattern, And,
right. It's building that mind-muscle connection,
Exactly. That's bodybuilding shit, I suppose, but it's really just motor learning. So, some of these bodybuilding exercises, these isolation exercises could be useful in helping with the main lifts, but they're not going to put weight on the bar. That's not what they're going to do. They're going to indirectly put weight on the bar by improving your body awareness. That's how I would argue it. One time I had a girl, this was an assistance exercise. I had a girl she got bored, wanted to do like a hypertrophy type deal. And she's a strong strength lifter / power lifter. she didn't want to train hard, for strength, and wanted something to keep her in the gym. So I put her in like a bodybuilding program with my own spin to it. This was years ago. So I made sure the main lifts were in there a couple times a week. Anyways, one of the lifts that I put in there was a deficit deadlift for tens. And she ran that up. And, I think it was just from doing all the reps and the longer range of motion. Somehow she can pull a deadlift now with a flat back at a very high percentage of her max. Whereas she could not do that before. And, it was the damnedest thing. She also has a short torso, so that probably helps. I have a long torso, so my mid-thoracic is inevitably going to flex to some degree.
Yes, yeah.
But she used to have a problem with back rounding, and after that training cycle, those high rep deficits fixed it. I don't prescribe that kind of shit anymore, but it wasn't there for that purpose. It was there for entertainment, which she got. But my theory behind it was that the spinal erectors are probably both, type 1 and type 2 at a pretty even ratio, since you have to stand up all day. They're designed to resist fatigue in addition to producing force. So I think they will respond to reps and they'll respond to weight. I think a combination of both in some capacity is probably useful. Glute ham device is one way to do it without, throwing a compound in there that might result in your back relaxing before your hips and knees, which, it's typically how people get injured doing high reps on squats and deadlifts. The back tends to go before the muscles of the hips and knees do. So, you can do a glute ham device. There's various ways to do that, but I think that the erectors, can be trained for endurance as well, and you'll put on some muscle that way as well.
Yeah. And the same idea is behind the good morning as well, right? It's a higher loading, it involves, a little bit, the way that I do them and show people I do them involves a lot of hamstring as well. Because the hamstrings are extending quite a bit because you're shoving your ass way, way back and trying to put as much of your butt behind your center of mass, that midline, as you can. But yeah, same idea. So yeah, that's the interesting thing, right? You kind of sketched it out earlier that if you are a serious lifter, you're going to go through a novice phase of training that's going to be very small in terms of your exercise selection. You're just going to work the 4 big lifts. And then shortly thereafter, you're going to start introducing some of the other, like you said, the honorary barbell lifts, like the chin up. That's the primary one. And then, a little bit after that, we might introduce something like the lying triceps extension or dips, which is similar to the chin up in terms of allowing you to work your upper body a little bit more. But it's still, your exercise selection is very small. Then you get a little bit more advanced and you start identifying weaknesses, and the exercise selection grows. And sometimes I think most lifters are going to go through a phase where they have to just test out different supplemental and accessory lifts, right? In other words, like, how do you know if you're going to respond, if you have a problem with keeping your lower back, with lower back fatiguing during your competition lifts, how do you know if you're going to respond better to deficit deadlifts or to good mornings or to glute ham stuff, right? Well, you don't. It kind of is going to depend on your anthropometry. It's going to depend on you, just your individual preferences. But you're going to probably try all 3 of those, and you'll find over time that, like, you're like, yeah, you know what? Good mornings, they just torch my lower back, and I cannot recover from them, and it screws up all the rest of my lifting for the rest of the week. But I can do glute ham stuff, and it still gets me the same basic thing. It still helps me build my proprioception, keeping my lower back set under fatigue, and I can recover from it, right? Or vice versa. There might be another lifter who's the opposite. So you get to a fairly advanced level, and you've identified the small, like the handful of assistance exercises, if even that many, that you need. And then you narrow back down and you're back to just the competition lifts and maybe a couple of, targeted lifts in addition to that. So that's the interesting intermediate training for lifters is very frustrating for this reason, but it's also kind of fun. You get to try out a lot of different stuff.
Yeah. So, it starts out very general, gets more specific, and then gets general all over again.
Yeah. Right.
And from a strength standpoint.
Yeah. Right. I'll throw out one other thing. I think accessory lifts can be useful too to manage stress. And this is particularly for the older folks, but even, I find this myself, like there are certain, my knees are just kind of testy on squats. And I kind of learned the hard way that if I do a bunch of 5s for sets across, it's that damned 5th rep most of the time that bugs me. Like I'll get tired and my knee position will get compromised on the 5th rep of the 4th and 5th sets if I'm doing sets across, or 6th set, whatever it is. And that stupid 5th rep where my knees slide or whatever, or they come in, bugs the heck out of my knee. So I've kind of learned over time that if I want to do some higher rep work, or if I want to do a bunch of 5s or 8s across, then I'm better off using a lighter squat variant. So I'll high bar squat my 8s.
Oh yeah.
I'll front squat for a whole bunch of sets if I want to do more quad focused squat. But really it's not because the low bar squat is deficient. It's just that for me, I have a persistent problem with holding my knee position for 5s across. So I just don't do them anymore.
Yeah, and I'm on the same token, I don't do 5 sets of 5 on squat because I've found that when I do that much, I can't deadlift.
Yeah, right.
So I do, I did 3 for a while and that worked. And then I found that 3 wasn't getting my squat up. So I did 4. 4 got my legs bigger and my squat started moving and I was still able to deadlift. So that seems to be the magic number for me, 4 sets of 5 across if I'm going to do 5s. I also have figured out that, I need to bench very often. I bench 3 times a week. I press twice a week, chin 3 times a week, and that seems to work pretty good. But yeah, you learn this stuff through experience. And again, if you're asking, do you need accessories? You probably don't have experience. So you need to get your lifts in order and build those up first. And the time for accessories, quote unquote, will come.
Yeah. Yeah, more than likely you'll be kind of forced to use them. I really don't like to close grip bench. I don't like to wide grip bench. I just don't, not that I hate them. They're fine, but I just don't care, right? I just don't enjoy doing those. I just want to bench. But I was talking to you a few days ago, like I've had this problem with my my left pec. The insertion point kind of up near my humerus is somewhere, but it's in the muscle belly, not in the tendon. It's just, I've got some like tightness there that's just been persistent. It's been growing over the last couple months. And I really don't want to tear a pec because everybody I know that has torn a pec has retorn that pec at some point. So I really don't want to tear my fucking pec. So what I've started doing is I finally dawned on me like a dummy. I'd just be like, well, if somebody else came to me and they had that problem, I would have them change their grip. And I'd have them work close grips. I'd have them work wide grips. You just try to change the angle that they were benching at. Incline if they could do it. And I'm like, oh, duh. Well, why don't I do that?
Yeah, I had to do the same thing.
So I did that, right? And I've been working my close grip and I've been working wide grip bench. I've been doing no standard benching other than just like warming up. But I'll go back to it eventually. And that seems to help. Right, just because I'm just taking that muscle belly through a slightly different, I'm putting it under a slightly different angle, taking it through a slightly different range of motion. It's not hugely different, but just that small change seems to work, and it can. So these things can be helpful in avoiding overuse injuries over time. But that's the thing, like I didn't need it until I did. Close grips didn't really help me. I didn't need them to drive up my bench until I just couldn't standard bench anymore. So you probably find that you'll be forced into using some of these accessories on an as needed basis rather than jumping in from the beginning.
Yeah, so I think that's probably a good place to end it. I think we've kind of covered everything on that. Beat that to a pulp. We gave some good examples, hopefully, that you can apply.
Stop rowing out. Stop rowing out. Come on. Yeah. You can do this. 4 lifts, just 4.
Just 4.
Exercise, like think about this. You'll be exercising monk-like discipline. You'll be staring at that rack of shiny dumbbells over there in the mirrors, and you'll just be squatting by yourself like a monk. You're a barbell monk now.
Yeah, just like us. You know, and if you can't stand sitting still, and you feel like it's not enough, go for a fucking walk. You're probably sitting around too much.
Right? Yeah.
You don't need to turn lifting into an endurance activity. It's not a very good one anyways. So, just go for get your walking up, That's what I've been telling people lately, because you get these fucking people that, they want to move around all the time. And that's fine. You shouldn't be inactive. And, a lot of people have sedentary jobs, so fine. Arbitrary 10,000 steps a day. You can do that, you're probably going to feel a lot better without having to, feel like you're having a heart attack in the weight room. You can, structure your weight room time such that it's productive and you're doing your 5 lifts. And that's it, that's it. So that said, thank you for tuning in to the Weights and Plates podcast. You can find me at www.weightsandplates.com or on Instagram at @the_Robert_Santana, or the gym is at weights_and_plates.
All right. Very good. You know where to find me, at Marmalade Cream on Instagram. That's marmalade_cream on Instagram. You can also email me, Trent, at marmaladecream.com. That's my audio production business, but soon, very soon, Jones Barbell Club will be a place you can find me as well.
Very cool.
But I got a couple of things I got to get done before I can set that up. So until next time.